prop up North Korea. And now they're much more likely to do nothing or take advantage of that to see some type of national unification. And that may be crazy talk on my part. But the reality is I don't see any other way out of this group. Sorry. Yes?
Do you agree with the statement that North Korea wants a deal with the U.S. like similar to the one the U.S. had with India? And do you think it would be easier to negotiate with North Korea if that deal with India had never happened?
Yes. I mean, there's no question that's what North Korea wants. They want to be recognized as a nuclear power. But with my dear apologies to North Korea, they are not India. Yeah? This is like the old, it's probably, I'm dating myself too, but you'll remember there's a great political debate where Dan Quayle was debating against Al Gore. This is the Clinton Bush election back in whatever year that was, 2000, right? No. 96, right? 96, whatever. No, it's 92. 92. Sorry. But there's a great moment there where Dan Quayle is debating against Lloyd Benson, and he's talking about his youth and vigor and how he's like John F. Kennedy, right? And Senator Benson says, Vice President Quayle, I knew John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
You are not John F. Kennedy. It was a real just scathing moment, this kind of historical and kind of presidential debates. But anyway, long story short, I mean, I have been to India. You are not India. India is, major rising power, largest democracy in the world, stable government, stable country. They never signed the NPT. They never joined the NPT, right? North Korea, starving, poor, bankrupt, pariah state, has never had a weapon system that they have not sold, right? They sponsor terrorism abroad. They sponsor criminal activities wherever they go, right? And so the basic thing is, if North Korea could break out of the NPT, break his agreements, pull out, test a weapon, kick out the IAEA inspectors, do all the stuff they've done, and eventually become accepted like India or Pakistan, which is probably a more appropriate one. The North Koreans don't want to be compared to Pakistan. That's probably more appropriate than India, right? If they could do that, what country in the world is not better qualified or more acceptable to be a nuclear power than North Korea? They are literally the lowest of the low, right? They really are in terms of who you would want to be a nuclear power. I mean, we'd prefer to have Zimbabwe be a nuclear power. Maybe even Libya today. They had a program, right? No, not really. Probably Libya today are probably below that. But you get the point there, right? So 100% I agree with your assumption. Makes sense. Yes?
In the event if there was, another war between North Korea and South Korea, given China's, policy on the three no's and just, their general relationship with North Korea now, how likely do you think it is that they would ever consider, basically repeating what they did during the first war and actually coming militarily to the aid of North Korea against South Korea and the United States?
That's an extremely important question. And I don't think anyone has a clear answer. I'll give you my own analysis, my own assessment of this. Remember, that China officially never came to North Korea's aid during the war. They sent 2 million Chinese volunteers. They volunteered in the middle of the winter to charge into North Korea and die by the millions, including Mao's son, right? In this great battle to help the North Korean fatherland, right? The notion that China today would do the same thing, I find inconceivable. China obviously is a much different country than it was in 1950. China, has aspirations of being a global power. Whether or not they want to be called a global stakeholder or not, responsible stakeholder or not, they have those aspirations. Obviously, the ramifications for Vietnam and Southeast Asia and how they view China and Tibet and Taiwan and all these other issues that are core interests of China would be just damaged beyond belief if they did it. So I think the scenarios in which China intervenes are very, very, very few, particularly if North Korea is seen as the agent provocateur. And I think the Chinese have been pretty blunt with North Korea about that. They said, we do not have your back. You do something stupid, you're on your own. The Chinese were trying for a while to kind of remove the language in their mutual, it's not a treaty, but their mutual cooperation and friendship agreement that implied such, right? So, if South Korea or the U.S. was perceived to be the aggressor, that could change this narrative somewhat, but China's fundamental interests, I think, are unchanged. I can't see that. The concern of South Koreans, of course, is what China would do then to seal the border. Would they maybe come across the North Korean border and take some land just because it's easier stop North Koreans inside North Korea than it is inside China? Would they be helping the U.S. in trying to identify weapons of mass destructions and those other sites, presuming the Chinese know where they were? But the truth is, Chinese know less than we do. I mean, Hu Jintao was stunned when he found out that North Koreans had the uranium enrichment program. We had to tell him about it. You know, that was the tough message to Hu Jintao this January. You know, the 2 times you met with Kim Jong-il last year, and you hugged and you drank together, and he promised you no surprises? Well, guess what? He knew. He lied to you. But yeah, great question. We wish I had a firm answer. Yes?
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
Can you tell me the succession? The first question, and the second question, first question, and if son Kim Jong-un,
Yes.
I heard this in the morning from my friend, but he graduated from the university in Switzerland, so he might have regular idea about the policy, I guess. So this is so he might have he might change the policy. This is my case, but the first question. And the second question is about the possibility of demonstration in North Korea.
Like
And
Egypt.
There's no internet in North Korea, so I heard they can't do they can't have big demonstration against government as happening in Africa. So how do you think of it? How real it is happening?
Two very good questions. First, about whether Kim Jong-un is a closet reformer in the whole succession process. When I first came to Washington 20 years ago, one of the very first events I attended here was an event where State Department INR speaker, who I will not name because it would be embarrassing for him because he was so wrong, was telling us all what a great reformer that Kim Jong-il was going to be. He was a young generation. He was a technocrat. You know, he wasn't like his father's old generation. He really wanted to open and reform North Korea. You know, and 20 years later, you know, North Korea's gone the exact opposite direction, right? And so there again are those voices, many of them in China, who are counting on Kim Jong-un to be young. He didn't come out of college in Switzerland. He got out of high school in Switzerland. Apparently, reported North Koreans went to the military academy in Pyongyang. But again, he's 27 years old, which of course is a very wise age. I speak to this class. But, you know, but you know, long story short, you know, given the pressures and what's going on in North Korea, it's a tough thing to do to take over at this point. I'll just give you a couple of ways to look at succession in North Korea. When Kim Jong-il took over from his father, everyone assumed that he would fail, right? Here you had Papa, you know, big, tall, handsome, heroic, anti-Japanese fighter, has this long legacy, right? And you know, he's been ruling the country for 40 some odd years, and then all of a sudden, you know, he dies, and who's the successor? Junior with platform shoes and the bouffant hairdo, right? You know, and you know, it's kind of the mini-me kind of thing going on, right? And everyone thought there's no way in the world Kim Jong-il can hold on to power. No way. And so, you know, vast majorities of experts in the U.S. and Japan and everyone else predicted a collapse of North Korea. The head of the CIA, yeah, said North Korea's going to collapse. This is in the early 1990s, right? You know, we negotiated with North Korea based on the presumption that they would collapse. Well, you know, 20-some odd years later, you know, things are still relatively, well, not 20, 17 years later, since the death of Kim Il-sung, things are still relatively stable. And the reason is this. Kim Jong-il actually gradually, over the course of 20 years, assumed power from his father. He took it. And he built a power base among the generation, among the military, among this generation of powers. So by the time his father died in 1994, he'd already been running the country for more than a decade, right? And he was the power. We just didn't see it. We didn't understand it there now. But now it's a very different situation from Kim Jong-un, right? At this point, he has been, you know, trounced before the big party Congress in October. He's been given the same furry hat that his dad has. And believe me, there'll be like 20 media articles about Kim Jong-il's wearing the same hat as his dad. It's like, this is the level of our analysis of North Korea. This is why I go back to my notion about being, you know, humble in terms of how much we know in terms of the process, right? But for me, the dynamic's important. This process is being rushed. Kim Jong-il had a major stroke. If you're 70 years old and you've had a stroke and you've been a hard drinking guy for your whole life, you know, if you're an insurance actuarial table, you're going to look at that and say, maybe 5 years. You know? Now, he's not going to be around for long, right? It doesn't happen, right? And so Kim Jong-il is trying to rush succession to his son. right? But rather than Kim Jong-un taking power, his father's trying to give it to him. And you can go back to walk around Versailles, look at almost any succession in the world. Third generation transfers of power are tough. Second generations, yeah, that happens a lot. It's quite common. Third generations, not so common, right? It's tough. Fourth generation is even less common, right? As you go down there. It's because, the succession, the environment in which the leaders grow up is just fundamentally different. So the longer Kim Jong-il is alive, the greater the possibility for a relatively smooth succession. The more quickly he dies, the more likely it'll be disrupted. But one way or the other, I cannot imagine a scenario which over the long term that Kim Jong-il continues to hold on to power for a long period of time. The question of public demonstration. This is at the crux of thousands of failed predictions of North Korean collapse, right? So, really ever since I've been dealing with North Korea, I've been watching analysts who are far smarter than me ruin their careers by predicting North Korea's demise, right? 1989, the winds are changing, Russia into the Berlin Wall, North Korea will change, right? And then once the Soviets and the Chinese cut off their support, North Korea will collapse. Then it happened. Once the old man dies, North Korea will collapse. Didn't happen. The massive famine in 97, 98. A million North Koreans die at least, right? No collapse, right? So people at this point say, maybe he's going to stick around. Now that once again the drumbeat is to change. The truth is, though, the risk of a collapse today is greater than it's ever been before because of several factors. Number one is, while this is not Egypt, you don't have people's ability to gather together unauthorized in major squares. You don't have an infrastructure for communication. It's still, in a North Korean context, more than ever before. You have 300,000 cell phones, which still is less than just over 2% of the population in North Korea, right? But still more than ever before in North Korea among the elite. But still, they can talk, right? And if you look at Egypt, the people who are causing the problems aren't the poor farmers, right? It's the elite. So that's a factor that the North Korean leaders are really worried about right now, reacting to dramatically. You also have 20,000 North Korean defectors now living in South Korea, all pumping back money and information to their relatives in North Korea. Probably double or triple that number in China doing the same thing. So that dynamic is fundamentally different. So when you combine Kim Jong-il's health, a forced and rushed succession, failed currency reform last November, or 2 years ago in November, when the North Koreans had to apologize for the first time to the people for having really messed things up, that they couldn't blame anybody else, they messed it up, right? When you have ongoing questions of famine and food supply and economic privation, real pressure from the international community, information flows like you've never had before, I still can't draw you the point A to B how you get to collapse, because the infrastructure that you have in Egypt or other places doesn't exist. Communication, transportation, mobilization, that infrastructure is not there. But that said,